Okay. Um, Start with an intro. These are your...
My 10 favorite books?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, these, in no particular order, are my 10 favorite books right now. Let's see. Number 10 would be River of Doubt. I can't remember the author's name, but it's about Theodore Roosevelt's journey to map this tributary of the Amazon. It almost killed him. Everybody knows me knows Theodore Roosevelt's one of my huge heroes. And I think of this as like the story of the world's worst camping trip, because they take off and they're really not well prepared at all, and the people that they've hired to work with them aren't familiar with the Amazon at all, and they have all the wrong equipment and boats, and they think that they're going to be able to shoot animals because everywhere else in the world you can just live off the land that way, but in the rainforest there's no animals on the ground. But there are, hostile Indians and all kinds of stuff. But anyway, he got an infection actually and almost died. But it's a fantastic book. So that's on my list. Fortunate Son by Lewis Puller. This is one of a few books that really kind of made me sit down and think. Lewis Puller was the son of a man named Chesty Puller, who was the most highly decorated U.S. Marine in history. And Lewis Puller went to William & Mary, which is where I went to college, and then enlisted in the Marine Corps and went to Vietnam and stepped on a booby trap and had basically his entire lower body blown completely off. He ended up being one of the most horribly, severely wounded soldiers to survive. And he survived and eventually, made a comeback, and he became very active in the Vietnam veterans movement. And then, he battled alcohol and depression for years and years. And then he wrote this book called Fortunate Son, which is his memoir. And he came and spoke to my Vietnam War history class in college. And he was there up front, and he was in his wheelchair. And he had just found out the day before that he had won the Pulitzer Prize. And then about 2 months later, he committed suicide. But the book I thought was just, it was very powerful. Partly because I was the same age he was, when he was there, and just to think about having something like that happen when you're 22, and just in a second, your whole life changes, and to try to come back from that, I just thought it was amazing. So good book. Let's see. The Hobbit. Enough said. I love Tolkien. That book also had a profound impact on me when I read it the first time. Then, let's see, what are we up to, 7?
Yep.
That's Lord of the Rings, for the same reason. I think that Samwise Gamgee is one of my favorite characters, real or fictional, because, he basically followed Frodo, to hell and back just because he said he would. And I think loyalty is important. And I really just admired that, especially for a small guy. Let's see, next would be, I can't really narrow this down. Anything by Terry Pratchett. Now, Terry Pratchett is this British humor writer who died a couple of years ago, who created this whole alternate universe called Discworld. It's a little bit like the Italian Renaissance, but these people live on this huge disc that's on the back of these 3 elephants that are standing on the shell of this giant tortoise that's swimming slowly through space. And the characters are just hysterically funny, and a lot of the books are, he talks about, sort of does like retellings of things that are happening in the real world. Like he has this book about, one guy sets up a newspaper, and then they have to set up there's all these kind of ripple effects. But anyway, every single one of them are hilarious. I guess if I had to pick a favorite one, it'd probably be The Color of Magic. But he wrote, I'm going to say almost 30 books, I think. Any of them is fantastic. Let's see. Next would be. Oh, okay. How about would be. I can't remember the title. It'll come to me in a minute, but it's by Stephen Ambrose. and it was Dwight Eisenhower's official war memoir that he got Stephen Ambrose to write for him. I want to say it was called Ike, but it's all about Eisenhower's, what he did during World War II with Overlord in North Africa. And it's an incredibly well-written book, especially for, it's also got a lot of technical details in it, but Stephen Ambrose does a really good job with that kind of stuff.
It's called Ike's Spice.
Yes. Then there's, let's see, moving up, what have we got? I know. Okay, An Anthropologist on Mars by Oliver Sacks. Did you ever see the movie Awakenings? Came out in the early 1980s. It had Robin Williams in it. It's about people with Parkinson's disease. That was written by Oliver Sacks, who's a neurologist who also recently passed away, but lived in London and New York, and he wrote these absolutely brilliant stories about patients who had, unusual neurological problems, and what I really like about his books are that, he always, he clearly, he loves his patients, and, he's not sort of, making fun of them. He just has this tremendous, sort of humanity. Like there's one where there's a surgeon in Canada who has Tourette syndrome, which is this tic disorder where you have all these sort of compulsive movements. And the guy, it's very difficult for him to get through the day most of the time, except when he's in the operating room. And when he's in the OR, it doesn't happen at all. But the rest of the time, and so the people that work with him at the hospital accept him because when he has to work, he's fine. It's just the rest of the time. But, things like that. And let's see, so then, how many is that?
Three more.
Three more. Okay, how about Sheep on a Jeep it's a kid's book. Might be by Sandra Boynton.
Nancy E. Shaw.
Yes, yes. Sheep in a Jeep on a hill that's steep. Yep, that's a great story. About anyway, that was one of my favorite stories when I was a little kid. And these sheep, and they get in the Jeep, and it's about plucky mammals and the resourcefulness of sheep, which I think is often overlooked in our society. Let's see, the next one would be Team of Rivals. I know, probably everybody has that on their list, but let me just tell you a quickie anecdote. Yes, I grew up in Virginia. I was, steeped in all the, traditions of Virginia history and the Civil War and all this kind of stuff. And then when I was in college, I had this, he was a fantastic professor who taught the Civil War history class, except that he was completely on this, in the bag for the Confederacy. We used to say it was like he was the last surviving Confederate veteran. And so anyway, after that class, it took me years to forgive Lincoln because I hated Lincoln's guts. And then finally, probably 10 years later, one of my friends made me read Team of Rivals, and it completely spun me around and, got me back to, respecting Lincoln. And it's also well written. So what are we up to now?
One more.
One more. Let's see. How about, I know. That's The Collected Poems of Robert Service. I found out about Robert Service when I was in 12th grade because I got assigned to do a senior history project, literature project, and we had to pick a poet and do a presentation on them. Robert Service wrote a book called The Spell of the Yukon, and I think of him as kind of like Jack London, but he was out in the Yukon during the gold rush, and he wrote all these great poems, and they're all, but they're all really funny kind of in their own way. And so I actually did my senior project on the cremation of Sam McGee, which is about this guy named Sam McGee who gets another guy to promise that they're out on a dog sled trying to get from point A to point B, and it's winter and it's freezing cold and dark, and they terrible. Sam McGee is from Tennessee, where the cotton blooms and blows, and so he basically realizes that he's not going to make it. So he makes the narrator promise that when he dies, that he'll cremate him, and so and then he dies, and so this guy has got this dog sled with this frozen dead guy on it, and he's trying to find a place to cremate him. And so finally he finds this ship that's wrecked in this like frozen lake, and so he sets fire to it and stuffs him in, and anyway, but and then at the end, Sam McGee, he goes up and checks, opens the door, and Sam McGee's in there, and he says, close the door, because it's the first time I've been warm since I got here. But other good poems by Robert Service would be The Shooting of Dan McGrew, and also Bessie's Boil. But anyway, so those, again, in no particular order, and with, I would add, very limited preparation, are my 10 favorite books.